Support for Race Unwrapped comes from the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage. Their mission is to enhance the public's knowledge of the history, heritage, and cultural contribution of African Americans in Kentucky and the African diaspora. KCAAH is dedicated to providing a heritage experience through education, enrichment, and entertainment. Located at 1701 West Muhammad Ali Boulevard. Calendar of events and more at kcaah.org.
From Louisville Public Media. Welcome to Race Unwrapped. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. Amara tabor-smith calls herself a performance artist. She doesn't want to limit how she identifies her artistic paths, even though she's primarily a choreographer and a dance maker. She's also a theater creator, and she does scenic installations. She's a professor at Stanford University, and y'all, I hear her classes are a hot property to get into. On this episode, we talk about how art isn't just where you can find it, but how it can find you. Well, Amara, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I've been reading all about you, and man, you do some interesting work. Could you tell me a little bit about where you work? You're an artist and a teacher.
I just want to say thank you for this invitation to be in conversation with you. I teach at Stanford University. I'm based in Oakland, California, and my teaching at Stanford also supports my artistic practice, and I usually am rehearsing and doing my performance offerings in the Bay in Oakland.
I love that you identify as a performance maker.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you?
Well, when I use that term performance maker, I feel like it encompasses the range and scope of the work I do. I am a choreographer and dance maker, but I also am very interdisciplinary in my practice. It's also theater, it's also installation. And so I feel like saying a performance maker actually allows for the all-encompassing of my work so that I am not being perceived just as a dance maker. But, it's very theatrical what I do as well.
Well, it's funny because that is exactly what sort of drew me to you, and someone had recommended you. And I'm a theater maker myself, so no dance involved in anything I do. But there was one thing in particular that I wanted to ask you about that just sounds so fascinating. The House Full of Black Women. And that's a site-specific ritual performance project. And could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that was a project that I was engaged in and co-created with a theater artist named Ellen Sebastian Chang. And it was an 8-year project. We started that project in 2015. The final performance offerings took place in 2023. Originally, the performance project was going to be a 2-year project. The focus of that project it focused on the well-being, the displacement, and the sex trafficking of Black women and girls in Oakland. And it was a piece that I specifically kept in Oakland, though these issues are prevalent in other places. But Oakland is where I live, and it felt really important to me to create a project that was about and for my communities in Oakland. So there were approximately 25 core collaborators who worked on the project. And again, we started out thinking it would be a 2-year project, but it felt like we needed more time actually to cultivate deeper trust. Even though many of us knew each other, the kind of depth that we were seeking to explore in the work really did require more time. And so we worked on this project for 8 years. It took place as a series of episodes, and we called them episodes for the multiple meaning, the way that there's that phrase, antiquated phrase, female episodes. And so, we reclaimed this idea of an episode. And so each performance happened as an episode with a different sort of underlying ritual that supported the performance. And most of the performances happened in public space.
I was going to ask you about that. They took place in public. Where are the different kinds of places did it take place?
On the streets, in the front room of a house in Oakland. Several of the episodes took place in houses. Where else? Yeah, we did perform some of the episodes in more of a traditional theater space, but open lot. There was one in an open lot. And it was all throughout Oakland. So yeah, the performance offerings happened in many spaces, and many of them happened on the streets in Oakland.
And that's really fascinating to me, that because you said some of them took place in a traditional theater setting. How did you feel it was received differently when it was outside and when it was in public spaces than people going into a theater?
Yeah, well, very different, because, and even when we performed in the theater, we often used the theater in outside of traditional ways. Although that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. More people are using theater spaces in a multiple of ways. But to answer your question, it was very different, because many of for example, the episodes that took place on the streets were usually unannounced. So I drew from the Egungun masquerade tradition found in West Africa, which is in the Egungun masquerade, it's ancestor spirits that parade through the streets. And so we did several of our episodes were Egungun inspired masquerades on the streets of Oakland, and we never advertised them. We showed up, and part of the reason for that, from my perspective, is that, well, one, the ritual called for it, but also this idea of a mutual vulnerability between the audience or the people that would come upon it and weren't expecting it. There's something about a preparation that someone does when they're going to go to a performance. It's like, oh, I'm going to a performance, so I'm preparing myself. And that's very different than when you happen upon something that's occurring and, hopefully sparks your curiosity or, the range of feelings. And it is felt both ways, both by those who are masquerading and those who are witnessing.
I love that. That sounds, I can only imagine how cool it would be to be walking down the street and to encounter this, so to speak. That would be eye-opening and something, as you said, that inspires curiosity. So I think this is your own description of yourself, but I came across something where I think you described your work as rooted in Black, queer, Afro-futurist, surrealist, womanist principles that insist on liberation, joy, homefulness, and well-being.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I will say, I'm constantly updating sort of how I describe my work. I would say that I've moved away from sort of an Afrofuturist, though I love Afrofuturism. I'm thinking about very much about how the work is placed in the now. How does the future and the past converge in the now? And so I don't really call myself an Afro-nowist, but, I'm very much thinking about what does it mean to move out of this concept of move out of the concept or put the emphasis on the future, but put the emphasis on the now as what will indicate the future, so to speak. Yeah.
No, I know what you're saying. It's like one of my favorite authors is Octavia Butler. And, she was so well regarded for how she projected into the future. And the future is now. and
That part.
Right? So I don't know how much of it is futurist anymore. It's like you just said,
Right.
It's like sort of Afro now. So do you consider the work you do a form of protest or resistance?
So my former collaborator, Ellen Sebastian Chang, used to say something she said that continues to resonate with me. She said, I'm no longer thinking of resistance. I'm thinking about insistence. And so I see my work as insistence on well-being, because what really moved me about that proclamation that she made and how it resonates with me is that, right, to resist and protest or to stay in that language still centers what you're resisting and what you're protesting against. And I say, how do we recenter our awareness on what it is that we are wanting to affirm and insist upon? And so that's where I'm trying to be more mindful around my language, but also in my practice, is to think about, be mindful of what I'm, quote unquote, resisting or moving away from. But more importantly, what am I moving towards? This is something that, like in many workshops that I've been teaching, to have people name what's not working for them, the list is endless. To name what they want instead gets to be really difficult to name. And because, I know personally the way that I've been socialized is to, know very well, what the oppressions are that I am struggling with. But to imagine what my world and my being could be instead gets much harder. And that's where I want to be better. And I feel is necessary if we're going to move beyond parable of the sower.
Yes, yes. So why do you think it's particularly important right now?
Oh my God.
I know, right?
Oof, we could go on and on and on. It's particularly important right now because the oppressions are right in our face, right? I talk about the word apocalypse, like we're in an apocalypse. If you go to the root of the word apocalypse, the Greek word, it basically translates as the truth revealed. And there's something about the more you know and recognize we have a saying, the more you know, the more you owe. And I think of it in terms of, right, there's no illusions about where we are. So if we don't really change our relationship to this oppression, then we will be upholding the oppressions. We will be complicit. And so it's not about taking on, the largest power structures, it's about starting with ourselves. Like where inside of us is our, internalized oppressor leading, and, through imposter syndrome, low self-esteem, self-neglect. And in these ways that where we have personal power, we must protect, because that is not a given. As we see, our bodies are being policed and regulated, and and so it really is important. And I think that we need to cultivate a deeper endurance for the long game, because it's not going to change overnight. And how do we do both? How do we cultivate hope while we grieve? Because this is a time of great grief and tragedy. And there is still possibility for this world, or I like to say new earth, that we're trying to, or renewed earth that we're trying to co-create. Those of us who are really committed to creating a reality that is rooted in communal care and well-being. So it's critical right now. It's so critical. You get on the news, you get on social media, and you're being inundated with how wild it is. I mean, if this book was written or this movie was made 15 years ago, it would flop. Because why would it flop? Because it's like, that would never happen. People will be like, oh, that will never happen. Well, look where we are. And I also say this is an important moment because, if we do think about the future, 50, 100 years ago, 100 years from now, how are they going to look back at this time?
I think about that myself sometimes. Like I can't even imagine when I look at friends who have little kids, and I think about, man, what's the world? How's the world going to be talked about when that little kid is my age? Which reminds me, you teach a course called Conjure Art 101 that I hear is quite popular. Could you tell me a little bit about it and what impact you think it has?
Oh, yeah. So I created this course. Well, I created a term. I imagine I'm not the only one to ever use this term, but I created a definition around conjure art, and it was through a process, a creative process I was engaged in maybe 13 years ago when I was making a piece in honor of an artist named Ana Mendieta, who I was profoundly impacted by. And so I created this term conjure art really to describe my own work, and the ways that I am utilizing ritual practices, traditional ritual practices, in ways that I'm experimenting with. So experimenting with ritual practices in the art making and the performance making, but also in the actual performances. And so the course is basically, I talk a little bit about my work, but I mostly center the work of other artists that I feel are doing, that I know are doing similar things with, bringing a spiritual ritual into their art making, and that I would consider conjure artists. And so in my class, we explore the work of these artists, and some, in many cases are in conversations with the artists to, unpack issues of, how are they doing so? How are they experimenting in ways that don't put them into sort of appropriation or violating any sort of spiritual taboos or tenets, and like, what does it mean to experiment with ritual practices that, are very old, and how might that be a necessary evolution, and how might that be, over, like, stepping over boundaries, and like, how is an artist being in self-reflection and in the process, so that they're being responsible and accountable to the cultures and traditions that they're drawing from.
Do you have an example of that? Just like like a short, specific example of how an artist uses ritual in terms of what you teach?
Yes. So, I'll use my own work as an example. So the ways that I was talking about that I'm drawing from Egungun masquerade. And I will say that in Nigeria, Egungun masquerade is largely done by men. There are societies of women, but they're very few. And I've only heard that they exist. I've been researching, but have yet to actually make contact. But I know they do exist, but they're very few and far between. So I am drawing from that energy of calling ancestor spirit through the masquerade when we are processing. And I will say that one specific masquerade that comes to mind, we were parading through the streets of downtown Oakland during a time that was one of our first Friday events in downtown Oakland. And, so many streets were closed. And the focus was the underpinning ritual or prayer was, may the truth come to light. And it was specifically in regards to the issues of sex trafficking in Oakland, which has, is epidemic. Oakland has been considered one of the hubs in the United States. So we went out on the streets and we had a specific route that we were taking, and we veered from that route. And I can't remember how that happened. I don't even know. It wasn't a decision that was made. We went down some other streets. We found out later that one of the streets that we went down, and we found this out through one of our collaborators whose name is Regina Evans. She's a survivor of trafficking and an abolitionist, a sex trafficking abolitionist. And she said that, that street that we went down is now a hot spot for trafficking. And we didn't know that. But another thing that was really profound was that I can't remember the time frame. I think it was a matter of weeks after we did the procession, there was a scandal, so to speak, in the police department that the police chief had to step down because of his association with some trafficking that was happening within the department. And within a short period of time, there were, I believe, 2 other interim police chiefs who also had to step down, I believe, because of their knowledge
of
what was taking place. So I don't say that ritual did, invoke that itself, but I feel, I think it contributed to the vibrational shift.
Yeah,
that needed
that's
to
a big
occur.
deal. Not one, not 2, but three people it coming to
Had
light.
some association.
Right. So, do you think creative work can be both subversive and out in the open?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, I will say in my practice, when I'm doing ritual inside the creative process or even in the performance, it's not necessarily evident, to an audience. I think by and large, from what I've heard, is that it's felt, but it's not always evident. Like I'm not, saying this is a ritual and then we're doing something that you could say, that's a ritual. You know, sometimes, we in the performance process, there are acts that could be identifiable to an audience, but mostly not. Even when, in the case of House Full of Black Women, the work was again centered around displacement and sex trafficking, but we did not actually put that to the forefront. We didn't talk about it directly in the piece because, from my perspective, number one, you can learn more about these issues going online than I could ever teach you, quote unquote. But also, I'm not interested in making trauma work that's going to continue to traumatize you. It's more, how is this work shifting the vibration of the issue? So in that regard, having much of the ritual be sort of subversive, as you say, or underground is important so that it doesn't distract from, the intention of the work.
That totally makes sense. What is it that you think today's artists, and I mean across all the different genres of art, have to consider today that they didn't have to consider 5 years ago?
Yeah. I don't know that I have many answers to that question because we're in such a unique time. I think primarily what the biggest concern is sustainability, financial sustainability, funding, the lack of funding and the increased cuts to funding for artists. I think crucial for us is cultivating deeper senses of community and connection as artists, but also with larger communities. Like we have to figure out how we're going to find each other because we got, and I think that philanthropy, for all that it has provided in terms of, resource, has, never been a perfect structure, right? And it has tended to sort of divide, right? Well, we're all vying for the same pot of resources. So there's something about, some of us are going to get it and others of us are not, right? And at any given time, that's going to be the case. And that creates a sort of internal division. And I think that we have to figure out, like, I believe where we are right now is not going to last. But how are we prepared for the aftermath, the cleanup, the recalibration?
Yeah.
And we're not, because we're still struggling with how we're even being in this. But I think as artists, we have to find each other and we have to figure out who are our communities, who are the because the work has always been about who your community is, because who's coming to your shows, who's coming to buy your work. Like, how are we cultivating deeper relationships with people? And that's really necessary, is, how do we get offline and come to the table together and break bread and be in more communion in ways that we had to be before there was social media, before the internet disconnected us. I remember, I'm old enough to remember that time. And there's something about, and I think we are, craving that as a culture. But the generations that have grown up in these systems need to, be reminded that the void they might be feeling within can be filled through connection. So we have to find each other. And as artists, that's the work. That's the work, is bringing people together. How are we doing that more intentionally and not being in a transactional relationship with our audiences and those who support our work, but really, like, how are we, really creating communities?
So, in addition to being an experienced artist and teacher, you are a well-regarded one. I mean, you got the Guggenheim Fellowship, which is, no easy peasy thing to do. So what words of advice would you give to an artist struggling with the fear of being bold and making a statement in their work?
I think the biggest thing is trust the spirit of your work. Like, trust that you've been drawn to do this work, and let that guide you, whether you feel like it's a spirit or whether you feel like, this is, I feel called by my higher self, by myself, by some other external force, and, be loyal to your vision. Number one, be loyal to your vision and do your personal work on the ways that you might be getting in your own way. There's a choreographer based in New York, Ronald K. Brown, who I love, love. And I remember being at a show of his many, many years ago. And after the show, it was like Q&A with the audience. And, a very often asked question by the audience is, how do you make your work, right? Mm-hmm. And Ron said, I pray to the ancestors and I get out of the way. And that has always stuck with me. It's like, how do I get out of the way?
I love that so much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's great. That's wonderful. So I have one last question, and it's the question that I ask all the guests this season. So I almost started to send it to you ahead of time because you had said you were a little nervous, although I don't know why you were nervous because you are amazing. But what is your favorite protest song? And you don't have to limit it to just one, but is there like a song that comes to you when you're thinking, protest or standing up in your power against, the man, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. Well, the one that always comes in mind, because it's many people tend to know it. So if, for me, I'm always thinking about what is the music that can pull people in right away, where everybody can get in. And that's This Little Light of Mine.
Yes, right.
And, how it's this simple song, but how necessary, that idea is, this sits inside of me. The world didn't give it and the world can't take it away.
I love that.
That is the mantra for this moment. And it's also not centering the oppression.
Right.
It's an affirmation about the power within.
Well, that's going to make the list. That's going to make the cut. Well, it has been such a joy and a blessing and a benediction and all the words to have talked to you today. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you.
Oh,
Thank
this
you
has been
so
great.
much.
I've learned a lot from you, and I'm going to put some of this to practice in my own work. So
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Thank
thank
you
you.
again for the invitation.
That was Amara Tabor-Smith, who is a choreographer, dance maker, and professor at Stanford University. Next episode, we'll talk about an art form near and dear to my heart. And yes, it is an art form, television, with writer and showrunner Nkechi Okoro Carroll. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. Thanks for listening to Race Unwrapped.
Race Unwrapped is produced by Michelle Tyreen Johnson for Louisville Public Media. Music by Allison Cross. Our executive producer is Laura Ellis. For more information, to contact us, or to support Race Unwrapped, visit raceunwrapped.org.
Support for Race Unwrapped comes from the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage. Their mission is to enhance the public's knowledge of the history, heritage, and cultural contribution of African Americans in Kentucky and the African diaspora. KCAAH is dedicated to providing a heritage experience through education, enrichment, and entertainment. Located at 1701 West Muhammad Ali Boulevard. Calendar of events and more at kcaah.org.
From Louisville Public Media.